Welcome back, guys, to the Grateful Living podcast. Today, I am fortunate to have Fei Wu. Fei is the founder of Fei's World, a digital marketing and content creation um, company that works with small businesses, especially. Fei, if you want to go more into your introduction, feel free to do so.
Hey Arnav, thanks for inviting me to join you in this conversation. I really look forward to it. So I started Feisworld Media back in January 2016, left my corporate job of 10 years working at different digital agencies and consulting firms and decided to start my own media company. And it was much easier than I imagined, to be honest. I was very lucky. I had some clients to get started working with, right away. And also what I do these days is I am very passionate about content creation, in particular around tutorials for live streaming and putting your content out there and to draw in the right people. But I also I'm very engaged in the fitness, especially the Zumba dance communities right
Awesome.
now.
Yeah.
I'm helping them, basically helping instructors fill up their classes and find new customers.
Cool, cool. So let's take it back to the beginning. Set the scene for us of where you grew up. Maybe talk a little bit about your family and your circumstances and what were you like as a kid?
Yeah, so I grew up in Beijing, China, which is a very big city. And to put things in perspective, I don't know how many times of New York City Beijing is, but I remember just even as a kid to drive for hours from one end to the other. And at the time, there really wasn't that much traffic compared to what it is today. So it's a huge city that has a lot of opportunities. Both of my parents are artists, and my dad was a calligrapher. My mom still is today after retirement, a very talented artist. You can see her artworks,
Yeah.
behind me. And we're working on new projects together to put her artworks on clothing, creating clothing lines. But that was my upbringing to be in a very liberal, very creative environment. However, I did have about 4 years of my childhood spent with my extremely strict grandparents, and that was very traumatic for me for that in between time. But that was generally my upbringing.
What
Not,
age
yeah,
what age were you with your grandparents?
age 6 to 10. So basically, my elementary school years, first grade through fourth.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
Um, you know, most of my audience, I would say, grew up in the US, so talk a little bit about what it was like growing up in China. This was in the 90s. You had
This was, oh, thank you,
Yeah.
Arnav. You're very kind. So I was born in 83. So
Okay.
growing up would be, I would say, 83 through, I would say, the early to mid 90s, right? I don't know how to define upbringing these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was it like? I think it's probably very different than what people imagine. And I feel very lucky to be a child of the 80s. By the way, what year, when did you grow up? You probably grew up in the 90s, I assume, or not, right?
Yeah, I was born in 1995, so I
Okay.
was yeah.
So very, very young, 95. Wow.
Yeah.
Um, that's great. So, I think growing up for us, I really remember as an only child. By the way, all my friends are only childs, and growing up in Beijing, there was a lot of effort, and it was first effort to think about how important it is for you to have your own friends, because I remember that nobody wants to go home on their own. So we always formed our little like masterminds, when we're little kids. And,
Yeah.
you have not only that, I remember having to work pretty hard as an only child to create games, to have certain talents that you broadcast. And, oh, I'm really good at telling jokes. Who want to hear jokes after school today? Or I'm really good at making clothes. And what that means, like using trash bags to like make clothes and whatever that meant. And, I felt privileged because on top of that, my parents were very accepting of my friends and invited them over, always prepared snacks, desserts, water for my friends. I remember I was just reflecting on this a few weeks ago. My mom always gave me money so I would take my friends to go eat McDonald's. So that was that
Yeah,
was something really special. But there was a lot of time spent together, a lot of crafty work, a lot of conversations, and non-digital activities, right?
cool, cool.
Yeah.
Um, at that young of an age, do you have any, memories of being introduced to entrepreneurship or, start people starting their own business?
That's a really good question. I grew up not remembering too much of that, at least not directly from my family. But I would say that I was always very excited to see different things because my mom, as I mentioned before we started recording, that my mom especially had a lot of friends living in North America and Europe. And because she was such a talented artist, she consulted a lot of fashion design companies, in particular in France and in England, I remember. And so I was like, I had to sliver into a different life because of her. And I was excited to explore. I couldn't, I guess the word entrepreneurship, especially today, solopreneurships simply didn't exist. But I realized, wow, mom could do this thing called consulting. Like, that was just fascinating. I always wanted to do something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what were you like as a kid? Were you I don't what were some of the activities you loved doing?
Yeah, I mean, I was very much a tomboy growing up, and it's interesting. Like I look at today that we have, we have more definitions and more inclusive in terms of sexuality and how people can actually create not just create new identity to resonate with, to understand themselves better. I think I grew up feeling a little bit confused, not so much about my own sexuality, but is confused about why young girls have to behave in a very different way. Back in the 80s was very
Yeah.
traditional. And, I definitely felt I had all boy cousins in Beijing, one older than me, two younger than I am, but it felt like it was very different. I never thought like, oh, you don't have a girl cousin. What would it be? 10 years later, I finally had one.
Yeah.
And she was so much younger. So I was babysitting her at that point. So, I think I definitely had a struggle of what I was allowed to do, to think about, to talk about versus what they were allowed to do. So I think growing up, I always had that tension or that desire to break out and to do something different. And but still want to be accepted and loved, of course. But there's the other force pulling me to say like, hey, be different, lead, do whatever you need to do. The sports I really loved, getting outdoors, are I was a huge skateboarding fan. I think I was one of the first few kids in Beijing really to buy a skateboard. Took a lot of begging and crying, and it's something I was felt so passionate about at a
Mm.
young age.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Talk to us about your process for coming to the US.
Yeah, so I pretty quickly realized that the system in Asia, in China in this case, was very stressful. And I know I was very young. I don't know why I felt this way, but I'm sure I wasn't the only kid. It just didn't feel right for me. And the idea of carrying a backpack as a young person in a small frame that literally weighed like 40 pounds, some ridiculous amount, right? Like
Yeah.
books and dictionaries and everything. There's no digital devices. um, I felt so worn down by it. And a lot of things I love wasn't really valued where I was going to school, including sports that is not basketball or soccer, creativity, like drawing, painting, dancing, music. None of these things mattered because the only things that did matter were math and mathematics and science and all these things.
Yeah.
So I started looking, and I think I was 15 years old when I told my parents that I want to study abroad. That idea came about also because my parents were a little bit older when they had me. They're both in their 30s as opposed to their friends in their like early 20s having
Yeah,
kids,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So they had friends who had kids who were studying abroad, who left just a few years before, I was ready to do so. So at 15, I told my mom I wanted to go, and she's like, "All right, let's look into the process. Get into what's going on." And keep in mind, at the time, when was this? Even 98 or so. I know Google was already invented, but even then in the US was a new thing, and in China was completely inaccessible and still is today.
Yep.
So I started looking literally newspapers. I remember my mom buying newspapers, those like weekend specials where you get all these like advertising section, and calling up lawyers, and I was just figuring things out on my own. So that was the
Yeah.
beginning of that.
You so how did you land on the US?
I think, believe it or not, US has remained to be one of the most popular destinations from then until now still. The challenge, right? The challenge of coming to the US, it was huge. I mean, it has become increasingly easier, but due to the more recent political events, and the pandemic, probably not so. But I think around 2010 or so, it has become more accessible. But at the time, it was so hard. And I just envision myself to be in a bigger place as opposed to a smaller country, learning a language such as German. One of our neighbor's kid went to Germany. And I thought, oh my God, if I learn German, chances are I probably have to learn English anyway. And I have no basics of zero infra knowledge on German or French. So I better leverage the limited language skill I do have, which is English. Okay, now the choices are down to Australia, UK, Canada, and the US. And so let's just aim for the most difficult one to go to. It's like, I hate to say this, but I do see in China at the time, a lot of kids ended up, they always go somewhere else and they all end up in the US. So I thought
Yep.
to myself, what if I just end up at the place where I'm going to develop a career or do whatever? So that was a vision.
How do you I don't know if you remember what you were feeling at the time, but I mean, how do you not have a sense of fear in, like even thinking about myself, like
Mm,
at, age 16, 17, to be thinking about like, moving abroad. I
yeah.
mean, I feel like I'd be so scared. What was it? Was just a, how did you not have that type of fear?
I feel like that's a good question. I want to look back to put myself in that same position to say, will I do it again? What was actually going through my head, right, at the time? And I feel like we have, as adults, there's more fear in us. I mean, I don't have children, but I can imagine people with kids, with family, with a husband, whatever, will find it more challenging to move. But at the time, like I was on the phone with a very young associate at Vanguard. She said, "Hey, my mom said you own nothing, you owe nothing." And I felt so free at that age to a certain degree. And I felt also, to be honest, quite desperate. I think among the group of kids, we're all just kids, everybody's under 18. In fact, there are a couple of 15-year-olds in the group. And I was 17. I just felt like, wow, I'm really ready to do this. Exactly what it takes day by day, I don't know. I know I need a phone card to call my parents. But, I think I just had the confidence of one, figuring things out. And I felt like my English was sufficient somewhat. And also the fear of not leaving, the fear of not giving it a shot, because I had seen people going through undergrad, even graduate school in China, and they never leave again. They just, which is obviously not the case. Sorry, there's like a fly in my room.
No,
Um,
good.
but, and it's not the case today. I just felt like I really had to leave. I really had to give myself this once in a lifetime opportunity, and I can always come back.
Yeah,
Right.
sounds good. So talk about, I guess, where you ended up coming to high school in the US and what was your experience like?
So traveling from Beijing to the US, I mean, at the airport, it was just so emotional, right? Leaving your parents, not
Yeah.
knowing when you're going to return. And my heart goes out to whoever's listening, either who has gone through this themselves or have, have friends or have parents who have gone through this. And it is very challenging. because it's just you. I miss my parents. I wasn't afraid to be here, but I knew I was going to miss my parents a lot. We picked out a school. So, oh, we actually didn't talk about how I ended up. So, quick backstory.
Yeah.
I ended up calling up all the newspapers. I was on a call with a lot of, at the time, I think they still are called agencies, independent agencies. These are not agencies that Chinese people will know today who have this whole package, the process, like very formal. At the time, you really have to talk to a lot of people. Then you go to these fancy temporary offices and sit down, get interviewed by them, take some English tests. And I ended up choosing Freiburg Academy in Maine. It was one of my top choices. I love, you can see so much of that like physical picture. You're like, oh, that looks like a great school. But part of me is like, oh my God, what if I showed up and then this place is completely unlivable, right? It was beautiful. And I also really I had another school I was interested in. I remember there's one in Massachusetts, which is where I am now. I'm in
Yeah.
Boston. The school was significantly more expensive, was preppier and more competitive, I remember. But the tuition was like, I remember being much higher. At the time for Freiburg, I think was around 35,000. And for Massachusetts, it was like 45 or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that money was a factor. But then there was another school in Minnesota, out of all places I wanted to go to because I wanted to play hockey.
Mm. Yeah.
Hockey made me feel so alive. But because all the other kids chose Freiburg, I ended up at Freiburg. So does that help? Like that's
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, cool. And so came here. I would say that I remember coming here and it was October and coming here in August, starting school, and by October or at the end of September, I saw snow. I mean, you just
Yeah.
do not see snow that early in the year. And I was so excited, Arnav. Like I can't even describe. I was just felt like, wow, this is my world. It's like Phase World, but like this is my world. Phase World starts right here. And you're creating something as I think as a young person that you feel like you're in control, right?
Yeah.
Your parents are not around. You're learning, you're unlearning, and all that, all those things just become so fascinating.
Do you so you were here for your senior year?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What
Senior year
was
in high school.
what was I mean, I'm sure there were some challenges
Yeah.
in transitioning from Beijing to Maine. What were some of the ones that you remember?
Um, my roommate was from Germany,
Yeah.
and I think it was just the transition. Did you say what was exciting or what was challenging?
I
Sorry.
mean, you can talk about both, but I mean, I
Yeah.
think it'd be interesting to think about, yeah, both would be great.
Yeah, I will talk about like what's the obvious like challenging part. I think the food was just a little bit challenging for me. I mean, I was so excited to be an American kid and I wanted to eat everything. And when you're young, you have a pretty good digestive system. I
Yeah.
mean, now I can't imagine in my 30s and just have to go eat like completely different food. I probably just crash.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was like, oh my God, cheeseburger. I've had one of those before. Pizza, I'm familiar with that, but it doesn't taste like we grew up with Pizza Hut. That's it. That's the only chain we had in China for a long time before Domino's and all that. So I was like looking at traditional like house pizza in the US. You're like, what is this? It's like so different. Um, I remember the only thing I was really shocked to look at was grilled cheese. The Chinese kids just look at it. It's like, oh, how do we pick it up? Like, what is this? What do you eat it with? Like, do you
Yeah.
say it was just, to be honest, like did not look appetizing to me
Yeah.
when I looked at it. But you tried it, you're like, okay, all right. So, very different. And I would say academically, as you can imagine, as a Chinese kid, math, physics, everything every science subject came very, very easy to us, and including math, of course. But what was really challenging was English, was creative writing, was anything history. Ugh. I really, I mean, I remember taking international history. I took regular English classes somewhat, and the school, Freiburg Academy, was so accommodating because it was one of the first few years where they welcome international students. So they hired, ESL teachers to really teach us and curriculum. and all that, but it was still, I remember it being challenging for me, and I couldn't imagine how much more challenging other kids, would experience. So I try to help them out, and like I definitely very challenging. And of course, immediately after that, in 2 months, we had SAT. We didn't realize that SAT came so early during the senior year because in China, it's at the very end of senior year,
Oh, okay.
like the summer before college, and you get your results in a week or whatever. Like now, not exactly today, but the month of July is what's known to be sort of the SAT days in China. That was
Gotcha.
challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Talk about your college process and what went into that and where you ended up going.
Yeah, so luckily, we had advisors at Freiburg. That process was getting a book. Well, we didn't purchase it. We all shared it. A book that's like weighs probably like 10, 15 pounds. You probably don't even know what I'm talking about, Arnav. Uh, like these books, it's called
Yeah.
like College 2000, and it looks like an encyclopedia.
Yeah. I
And
remember.
right.
Yeah.
It's like such a profound process to realize one, that there are that many universities in the US. And I have relatives, I still do. I have relatives living in Boston, in the Boston area. And my parents and I were just thinking, would it be nice to be close to them? Or how do we balance being close to them and versus going to the right college, the college I would enjoy? Unfortunately, at the time, I would say that we did not have the privilege to actually visit the schools.
Yeah.
Unlike I watch my friends who are older than I am with kids who are about to go to college, they would tour every single university, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah. Yeah.
if they had two kids, and mom is gonna, okay, you bring your kids to California, I bring this, and it's such a process. And
Yeah.
at the time, for me, it was just not even looking at real pictures, looking at a black and white picture inside that encyclopedia book.
Yeah.
And you're just guessing. It's like, think about like the amount of money you're going to spend, but I'm in the process of trying to find a home, buy an actual house for my mom. And I think about, oh my God, reimagine that now you are $250,000 in, and you have to look at a black and white photo that's like, tiny little image, and
Yeah.
you're looking at the stats. You need a ruler of some sort because the fonts were so small that I, so long story short, I ended up choosing Northeastern University in Boston because they had a co-op program. I was really eager to try. I wanted to make money
Yeah.
for my parents. It worked out really well, actually. So Northeastern, I studied computer science and math, which has very little to do with what I do today, but I do appreciate the foundation and understanding appreciation of technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk to us about your experience at Northeastern. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah. So Northeastern was, oh, the fly just literally flew right across here. And I'm gonna open the door real
Yeah.
quick.
Yeah.
Uh, I think the fly really would like to escape my office. So Northeastern was an interesting experience. Are you familiar with the area where you
A little
located?
bit. Yeah.
By the way, where
Um.
are you located, Arnav?
So I'm in Acton, but I went to Boston College. So
Oh,
I was, probably like 30 minutes from Northeastern.
where I am. I live in Newton, so
Oh, you
that's
live in
why.
New?
It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I can walk
Chestnut
to
Hill.
BC.
Yes, yes.
Chestnut Hill. I can walk
Yep.
to BC in like 5 minutes.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. Northeastern, as you know, it's like kind of a city school, which
Yep.
has its pros and cons. Definitely for me, I think I thought about, I would have preferred a more closed environment where this is the campus, like this is our community. Whereas Northeastern, for those of you who are listening and don't live in Boston, it's kind of a very big school divided by a Huntington Ave, which is this major street. So every day you got to cross the train tracks, just,
Yep.
not far to get to the other side. And there are a lot of, by the time I went to school, there were fewer commuters than there were like in the 1950s and 60s. And it was known at the time as a commuter school. But when I went, I felt like, wow, like it's just, I enjoy my experience, but it was also very stressful studying computer science,
Mm.
having labs and homework turned in. I don't know what my advice would be for kids who are going to school these days, but I think there needs to be a better balance between choosing the major where you think you're going to make money, satisfy your parents, versus the one that you think you will really enjoy and make friends with the right people, that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so talk to us about what you did after graduating from Northeastern.
Yeah, so selecting a job as an international student was particularly challenging. I went through, so, I guess this episode maybe will be somewhat helpful as a reflection for immigrants or,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or people who know of other immigrants that you can talk to and just have a better understanding of the situation for us, because even today in 2020, it's not that trivial. So imagine this for a second, that your school is kind enough to offer with something like a career center. You have an advisor you can work with, but still, when you look at a list of jobs that are available to regular graduates, if there are 200 positions on a piece of paper, now you eliminate the ones who will not accept people who is not a US citizen. Well, you have about, half of that left. Well, at the
Yeah,
time anyway.
yeah,
Then on top of that, you say, it's okay if you're not a US citizen, but you really need a green card. And that is, by the way, that's called the permanent residence, which takes forever to get in the US. And it's even more complex now with the current administration. Then now you have literally, at the time, I think I had like 7 jobs I could actually apply for, possibly less.
yeah,
I think anywhere between 2 to 7 is what it could
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
aim for. And so we had a valedictorian who was this guy, my God, computer science major, studied GRE for like 2 months, went to Stanford, started his own company, sold it to eBay, right? This is like literally his journey.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? How bad could it be if I just follow his journey? So I said, I said, okay, I'm going to try to do the same. So the company was called Sapient, and it's based in Boston, headquartered here, has a long history, tech consulting. I went through the interview process. There was very little chance of me getting in, securing a job, but I did it because everybody was like Harvard, MIT. I was like, oh, whatever. So went in with an open heart, came out with a job, and stayed there for 6 years. And I know that, since we want to make sure that we talk a little bit beyond my college years, I would say, I was at Sapient Business Tech Consulting for 6 years, which was a long time,
Yeah.
a lot of grind. And after that, about a year and a half at Digital Influence Group, which is kind of a PR is part of their offerings, but also digital marketing. And then after that, 2 years, I think 2 years, exactly 2 years at Arnold Worldwide, which
Yeah.
is an advertising company. So that's kind of concludes my 10 or so years working in corporate America.
Yeah. For someone looking for a job right now, um, especially looking back on it, what do you think is important um to think about before accepting the job?
I think you should go on more interviews. It's like almost a little bit like house shopping. Sure, when you're just out of school, right? Even or as a young person, which I believe probably most listeners are more or less your age,
Yeah.
and you might fall in love with something that is, whether the person you spoke with, maybe it's the office space you really loved, maybe have the
Yeah.
really good, I don't know. There are a lot of games in a lot of these agencies, but what we really want to look at is, um, you know, go on interviews, talk to people, actually talk to people who didn't just interview you. Try to interview back, like do a reverse interview of the people who actually work there. Have a
Yeah.
conversation. Now, it's not always possible, but the best thing you could do is to tag along someone for like a day or two. I would say a week, but a week is very unrealistic. But even for just a day, just to watch the environment and how things are unfolding, how people are working, because that culture actually matters a lot, which is something that you don't really get during the interview. However, do keep in mind, cultures do change. Whenever I hear someone to say, my buddy or someone who introduced me to this person, a strong connection works there, therefore I should work there. Every time I hear a story like that, you bet 6 months, a year later, that person leaves and your ally is gone and your
Yeah.
job's no longer what it's supposed to be, then people are really upset. So just prepare yourself to know that. And I would say the number one thing I learned as an entrepreneur and also working for 10 years
Yeah.
is that it's not your job's job to fulfill everything about your life. Sure, one day, some days you'd be like, wow, I really accomplished something. Good for you. But most jobs is not going, just are not going to fulfill your life. It's your responsibility to look for what interests you, what drives you, what energizes you, and do that. Whether that pays money or not, it's fine because you got your full-time job paying money here. But you need to start looking for other avenues to, especially as a creative person. And so that would be my advice.
Yeah. At that time, were you thinking about entrepreneurship? Were you saying, oh, like, I'm going to work 10 or 15 years and gain some skills in consulting and marketing and then or was it
Mhm.
really not really on your radar? Did you think, this isn't bad. I might be in corporate for, until I retire.
Oh, that was never the option.
Okay.
I think I had a very clear, again, the age and time I realized it wasn't for me may or may not work for everyone. For me, it became really clear when I was in my mid 20s. I think 25 to 26, after working for just a few years, it became really clear. And it became not, you know, not if, but like when sort of thing,
Yeah.
So for me, it was that age. As I'm consulting and helping other people making that transition, I've encountered people who are in their 30s, mid 30s, 40s, now even people in their 50s, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
And so for everyone, that is different. And for me, I think what's really helpful, to be honest, is even though my business and life partner think that, I'm going to be this executive EVP, SVP, I always knew, number one, I wasn't going to climb the corporate ladder willingly or easily. And just as an immigrant, based on who you see at the top, right? And number two, I just, like I said, like there's really very little desire. So it took me many, many years to get my green card. So I got my green card in October 2015,
Okay.
and I left my full-time job at the end of that year.
Yeah. Um, what are some pieces of advice um, for people maybe looking to start their own, you know, it doesn't even need to be a creative agency, but just
Mhm.
start their own business. Um, what were some things that you think you did right, and maybe some things, if you had to do it again, maybe you would do different?
Yeah, absolutely. Because of my job situation, even though, I made enough money, made more money later on, I always held on to my friends who are working on interesting projects, try to learn as much as possible, have conversations, volunteer my time for free. So I definitely did that in terms of my friends who ran software companies or, martial arts schools. It was so liberating because I got to do all the things I loved doing, such as
Yeah.
design and inventing things. So start doing that, getting in touch with people, offering your time for free, and that's okay, especially if it's an area that you don't have a lot of experience in. And so that became part of my life. And now, really, what you're doing is making that transition to make it more about you, your brand, the story you're telling, and the products you're creating. So that would be, my advice. I would also say starting a podcast is really smart. I
Yeah.
started my show in 2014. Arnav, you're relatively new to this. You will notice how much you grow, the way that you speak, the way you interview, the way you introduce someone, very, very quickly. And you
Yeah.
grow tremendously year, every 2, 3 months, every 6 year, guaranteed every year. In fact, you'll barely recognize your own voice after a little while. You're like, oh, I'm embarrassed to listen to this episode now, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to change and you're going to make friends. These connections are going to be so crucial for your entrepreneurship endeavor. So I'm suggesting that you don't just drop everything like, F this, I'm leaving corporate America, I don't care. And you want to start networking the right way. So let's talk about the wrong way for a second. The wrong way of networking is by going to bars and by going to these very generic social events. You can still do it to have fun, but when you go in when you know that purpose is to make connections, sometimes, as we know, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And I generally find this whole very sort of a bar sort of event. I mean, the location really matters. If you're going into a networking, especially a business oriented or creative or social events at a bar where you can't actually hear each other, where there's a chance that the person you're speaking with is drunk or not really there for what you're there for, then it's different. Instead, consider a nice meal, consider virtually, having a nice meal with someone isn't very easy to do these days. So consider someone you can, face to face on Zoom,
Yeah.
ask them really good questions, really be a good listener. These are great ways to make connections. So yeah, I would absolutely recommend that, and pay attention to what the market needs. Pay attention to not only what you need, what you want, that is important, but also pay attention to other people's pains and struggles and authentically trying to offer help. That could be your business.
How did you, were you considering a lot of different business ideas? How did you come up with the podcast as your first?
So my podcast actually wasn't necessarily my first business. I interviewed people and I was able to transfer my skill as a digital marketer for the people I interviewed on the show. Not every single guest. I didn't even have to go to them and say, do you need a website? Do you understand email marketing? They came to me instead. They said, oh, I just got interviewed by you. Or they say, they refer me to their friends. And it was, which is insane because we're connected on social media, on LinkedIn. When I post something, my guests are the first one to respond to them. And that was something so profound that I ended up talking about in the book called Entrepreneur You by, oh, oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
Not a notification. So I ended up talking about in Dory Clark's book, Entrepreneurial You, and it resonated with a lot of people. So that's how I started my business. And, then a big chunk of my business was also to transfer my skills and help a lot of small agencies and even medium-sized agencies. And they pay really well. By the way, that's okay. I know a lot of us really want to work with individuals, but it is at the beginning, it's hard because with individuals don't have always sufficient financial means or funds to support them, to have you help them. So definitely at the beginning of my journey was connecting and working for some of the companies first before I transitioned into what I'm doing today, which
Yeah.
is mostly working with creative entrepreneurs, fitness entrepreneurs.
Cool, cool. Can you talk to us a little bit about the documentary you produced?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, at this point, you probably noticed like there's a lot of things I'm interested in. And the documentary, by the way, I'm just going to say I didn't do it for money. In fact, if you want to make money, don't be a filmmaker. I mean, at least don't transition into being a filmmaker. Is
Yeah.
when you have a story you want to tell, when you have a point of view you want to make. And the documentary for me in 2018, in a way, was something I really wanted to do. I wanted to kind of capture a moment in my life, but not just by myself, sipping latte and smoothie at a cute cafe. I wanted to be about conversations I have with my mentors who has such tremendous impact on my becoming as an immigrant, starting age 17 to where I was 34, I think, when I shot the film. And so, I wanted to go through that process. I was so intrigued by documentaries. At that
Yeah.
time, I remember a few years ago, it was like, oh, documentary series. Now I have a new word called docu-series. And I noticed myself of wanting to watch, Chef's Table, wanting to watch all the documentaries because the Hollywood film just started to look alike. All of them. It became less interesting. Same plot, same love story, same horror story. And I always found myself watching documentary, and I said, how wild would it be if I could just create one with the support of my team? Also, as a digital marketer, I had a team of video producers and videographers, but I never in a million years thought they will work for me, like on my project. And the idea to turn that around was just so fascinating. We're very happy with how it turned out. We interviewed Seth Godin, we interviewed Dory Clark, Atherton twins from Cirque du Soleil, Chris Voss from, ex-FBI negotiation expert, who's now on Masterclass, who else? Sarah Cooper, who's like now all over the news. Sarah Cooper's a comedian. So
Yeah.
it was just incredible to have that opportunity.
Yeah. Sorry, I should have let me take it a little bit back. So talk to us at what point, you decided to quit your full-time job and go into full-time entrepreneurship?
So it was timing wise was interesting. I needed a green card, so I got that in
Yep.
October 2015. So that is unfortunately it's not really a requirement for probably most of the people listening to this. So I would say for me that's a milestone as an immigrant. I needed that before I can start my own company. Otherwise, I can't really live in this country, right? I
Yeah,
needed my
yeah, yeah.
H-1B work visa.
Yep.
And so for most of you guys, I would say when you start, some people say cold turkey and just do it. I've seen people succeeded. I've seen people suffered greatly from dropping everything, jumping over. But I would say a really, really safe way to do this, however, this require you to persevere and put in more work, is to take on projects on the side. Now that means maybe there will be nights and some weekends as well. But when you know that you're building up something much greater later on, it is worth the investment. And that's precisely what I did as well. Again, I even worked for free, right? And one of the things people say, hey, avoid burnout during that time, especially if you now are working a very stressful full-time job, maybe a job you really hate. If you really hate your job, it's like eating you alive. Well, consider switching your job, right? Still, you can still find a full-time job and pay the bills. And then on the side, what I found really productive and helpful is I told myself, just like podcasting, right? You need to have a schedule. You need to be realistic because you can't just not sleep.
Yeah.
So I did something for myself. It's called Tuesday, Thursday night. I'm doing my freelance work. I'm doing podcasting and one day during the weekend. So um, now I feel like I work more than when I was working full time than that model.
Yeah.
But at the time, give yourself some a leeway, have that conversation with your family. If you are someone who, has a family, tell your family, tell your loved one that this is important to you, including your kids. They're not stupid. They understand. Even if they're 5, 6 years old, you can explain that to them.
Were you at a point where some of those side projects, I guess the projects you were doing on the side
Mhm.
had become big enough where you could pay your bills on your own? What was the incentive at that point in 2016 to begin?
Oh, for me, I did not have enough of a cushion. However, I will say that not to be overlooked, I started saving on the first day of my job. 401k, opened up the account, age 23, because Northeastern had 5 years.
Yeah.
23, opened up the account, has been saving ever since. I have not touched my 401k since then. And what I realized is even though I wouldn't have enough money to say live or retire, but I definitely had more than enough cushion to realize that now as a freelancer, January 2016, I don't have to rush into anything. I saved money. I didn't, your habits, whatever that may be, consider that now, right? For me, it's like, okay, mentally, I felt okay. And when you feel okay, when you can chill and not be desperate, opportunities actually naturally come to you. So when I left, I did not have any single client. Think about it this way.
Wow.
Most likely, you will not have a single client who is going to pay all your bills.
Yeah.
When you become a freelancer, think about multiple revenue streams. You can think of your different clients who can provide you with this. At the time, I would say I only had a couple of clients and combined wouldn't be enough to pay my bills. But as soon as I made that leap over the weekend, I received a phone call and I was able to, dial back up working for a local PR agency in Watertown. That
Yeah.
was so convenient for me and life changing. Because for the first time, instead of spending an hour on the train, I drove my car there in 7 minutes, right? It was so liberating.
Yeah.
And then it just goes, once you find your first, second clients, it actually gets easier because now you know what you're doing. You know how accounting works, you know how contracts work. So if you're listening to this, you're thinking about LLC, starting your own LLC. I do have a whole section on my website called feisworld.com. By the way, that is Feisworld. There's a whole learn section where you can find how to begin freelancing. So I talk about how to start your LLC, how to find your first few clients, how to update your LinkedIn, all that stuff. And if you want to work with an attorney or someone who can draft your contracts, feel free to reach out to me. I have a lovely accountant I would refer to anybody. So yeah, a system can be put in place. It's
Yeah.
not daunting. And health insurance. has been the most popular article and video on my YouTube channel, on my website. Check it out. It can be done so easily and
Yeah.
affordably, if that's a word.
Yeah. What do you think, for you, what are I mean, I guess even now, what are the challenges, and then what are some of the benefits, or what are some of the times where you're like, I'm so glad that I am doing this, where you feel fulfilled?
Yeah, entrepreneurship is not for everyone. If you're like me, I mean, this is the only way to be. This is the only way to live. It's going to be very challenging for me to go back to corporate. And if you don't feel this way, I mean, again, everybody's where they are and how they feel with their, personality as a factor, all matters. So don't judge yourself at all. For me, I look at my life. I mean, this is all I have ever wanted. So, I get to talk to people like you. I get to interview other people at noon on a Wednesday, plan my own day, move my clients around, and everybody's happy. I get to do a lot of experiments. Most recently, in fact, last week, I worked with Alexander Bono International. They have an academy, and working with the prolific artists who are Steinway artists, Juilliard's graduate,
Yeah.
to coach kids, teach them piano while laughing with them, cracking jokes and doing it all through Zoom. So much fun. We just invented the program, and I'm training the instructors and putting a structure together to make it work. We're going to do it again for more advanced students. So projects like this, like the documentary, are
Yeah.
things I would have never been able to imagine because I love rolling up my sleeves, being lean, dirty, and get it done. So that's my style. And don't be afraid because there are so many people figuring things out every single day. And we're living in the pandemic now. So that's a unique opportunity where we're all learning new things. So don't be afraid to start something, meaning a Facebook group, to record a video, throw it on YouTube. Just start, hit the record button. Nobody's going to laugh at you. And even if they do, so what? Know that you are miles ahead of them because you put yourself out there. And you never know how your content is going to resonate with these people. You'll be blown away by it. Um, so with that said, Arnav, I do have a meeting that starts at
Yep.
2.
Yep.
So I apologize.
No worries. No worries.
Yeah,
Um, Thank you so much for being on. Or
very
was
welcome.
there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
I think we covered quite a bit. I mean, if people want to learn more about me, my work, watch the documentary for free on Amazon Prime. Simply, go to Amazon, search for Feisworld. But for freelance type of content for how I got here, my origin stories, visit feisworld.com. And I am at Feisworld everywhere on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you name it. And I am putting a lot of effort and energy into my YouTube channel, which is also called Feisworld Media, doing a lot of live streaming tutorials, entrepreneurial content. So check it out. Love to hear from people. I respond to a lot of messages, so look forward to it.
Perfect. Faye, I just want to acknowledge you.
Mhm.
You have an incredible journey, um, coming from China to the U.S. Um, and just, learning, going to Northeastern, spending 10 years in the corporate world, and then starting your own company in Phase World. Um, so I hope people are inspired by what you're doing, and um, thank you so much for sharing your journey.
Thank you for having me, Arnav. Best luck to you as well. Keep recording, keep interviewing people, and keep learning.
Thank you.